The leather folder sat in front of me, heavy as a heartbeat. Inside were the deeds Grandma's 21st birthday gift, a $50 million hotel with my name on it. But before I could even breathe, the front door opened. My mother walked in her new husband right behind her. We should manage it together as a family, she said, smiling like it was still her world. When I told her absolutely not. I'm the owner now, she snapped. Then pack your bags and leave this house. I didn't argue. I didn't move. Because I knew something they didn't. That night wasn't about their demands. It was about Grandma's next move, one that would end their little performance for good. When people look at me now, they see the hotel, the marble floors, the glass lobby, the name etched in gold above the entrance. But what they don't see is the noise that used to live inside this family. My grandmother, Sharon Bennett, built everything from one roadside motel in Vermont. She was 21 then, my age now, and everyone called her foolish. But she turned those doubts into brick and revenue. By the time I was born, the Bennett collection had become a name people whispered with envy. My mother, Brenda, inherited none of Grandma's patience, only her pride. To her, success wasn't about building, it was about being seen. She loved camera flashes more than blueprints. She loved control more than family. My father, Mark, was the opposite. He was calm, steady, a man who believed in doing things right even when it took longer. He ran operations for years, quietly keeping everything standing while Mom chased appearances. When I was 16, I watched that balance collapse. I still remember the night Dad left his eyes-tired suitcase by the door, saying he couldn't stay where love had become performance. The silence that followed him out the door was the kind that fills every corner and never leaves. After that, Brenda remarried quickly. Scott Miller, a smooth-talking business consultant who spoke in phrases like synergy and global expansion. He was everything she thought success looked like, shiny, loud, and hollow. Not long after she sent me to live with Grandma, claiming it was for stability. I knew better. I was just one less witness. Life with Grandma was quiet but never dull. Her home smelled of cedar and coffee. Her mornings began with the sound of typewriter keys. She treated me not as a child but as an apprentice. I studied architecture while she showed me what legacy truly meant: discipline, risk, and the courage to start over when others call you finished. Sometimes at night, I'd catch her looking over old property maps, the original sketches she drew by hand. She'd trace the outlines with a soft smile and say, "Every building tells a story, Sophia. The walls remember who built them and why." I didn't understand back then that she was also talking about people, about the kind of foundations we build within ourselves. Years passed. My mother's calls grew shorter, her words sharper. "You should visit," she'd say. "Scott wants to talk about the European market." I'd always have an exam or a project due, and the conversation would end with her disappointed sigh. We were strangers, connected by blood and legal paperwork. Until that morning, my 21st birthday, when Grandma asked me to sit at her desk. The leather folder was waiting, heavy and unfamiliar. She said, "This is your inheritance, but it's also your test." I didn't know what she meant, not yet. But I would soon enough. Because sometimes the moment you receive everything you've ever wanted is the same moment you find out who's coming to take it from you. Dinner that night felt like a celebration, roasted lamb candlelight flickering across the long oak table and Grandma smiling in that rare, peaceful way. For once, the house was quiet, filled only with the sound of silver against china. I remember thinking, maybe things are finally steady. Then the doorbell rang. It was one of those small sounds that change everything. I got up, napkin still in my hand. When I opened the door, the chill from the porch hit me first, and then her perfume. My mother, Brenda, stood there in a cream coat, her hair curled just so her smile stretched thin and glossy. Beside her was Scott, her husband, the so-called consultant, wearing that smug confidence that always smelled like cheap cologne and deceit. Sophia, Mom's voice dripped with cheer. "Happy birthday, sweetheart. We were just in the area and thought we'd stop by." Behind me, Grandma's chair scraped softly against the floor. They didn't wait to be invited in. Scott carried a gift bag, the kind you give when you already know what you want in return. Mom's eyes darted around the house, landing on the folder still sitting on the table, my inheritance. "We heard about your big gift," she said, her tone sugar-wrapped with poison. $50 million. How wonderful! I tried to stay polite. It's not about the number. Grandma wanted me to continue what she started. Mom laughed lightly, waving a manicured hand. Of course, but running a business that size isn't for children. You'll need experience, guidance. That's why Scott and I thought we could manage it together as a family. That word family landed like a slap. Scott leaned forward, resting his hands on the back of a chair. It's too much for one person, Sophia. Let us help. We've already drafted a proposal. Grandma's voice sliced through his. A proposal for something that isn't yours. The air shifted. Scott's smile faltered. Mom shot her a warning look, that same cold defiance she used to use on Dad. Mother, please. Let's be practical. Practical, Grandma repeated as if tasting the word. Like when you mortgaged the Burlington property without authorization, or when you disappeared for 6 months to expand and came back with debt color drained from Mom's face. That was years ago. Yes, Grandma said softly. And I remember every year it cost me. I stood there silent, the tension pressing against my ribs. The room smelled of rosemary and rage. Mom turned back to me, her voice brittle. Sophia, don't let her turn you against me. We're family. We should rebuild together. I wanted to believe her, but the way she looked at that folder told me the truth. This wasn't about rebuilding. It was about reclaiming power she'd already lost. Grandma rose from her chair, resting a steady hand on my shoulder. Dinner's over, she said calmly. Some things aren't up for discussion. Scott cleared his throat, forcing a smile. Of course. We'll talk again soon. But as the door closed behind them, I caught the whisper Mom left hanging in the air, quiet, venomous, meant only for me. This isn't over. And she was right. It wasn't. The next morning, the house didn't feel like home anymore. The light through the windows looked different, colder, thinner, as if the walls themselves knew what was coming. Grandma spent most of the day in her study, doors closed. I could hear the faint clack of her typewriter, the rhythm steadier than my own heartbeat. Downstairs, I found the breakfast table already occupied. My mother sat with a cup of coffee she hadn't been offered, flipping through one of Grandma's old ledgers, as if it already belonged to her. Scott was pacing by the window on the phone, whispering phrases like potential restructuring and joint control. They didn't see me at first, and for a second, I watched them, two intruders wearing family as camouflage. Mom finally looked up, her smile crisp. Morning, sweetheart. We were just brainstorming a few things. You know how to keep the business stable. Stable? I asked, keeping my voice even. It's been stable for 50 years. She ignored the jab. You're young, Sophia. You have your studies, your friends. You don't need to stress about payrolls or legal documents. That's what family is for. Scott nodded, his tone oily. Let us take care of the boring parts. You focus on your degree. I felt my pulse climb, but I said nothing. Instead, I walked over to the counter, poured myself a glass of orange juice, and let the silence stretch until it started to itch. Then I turned to them. Does Grandma know you're here? Mom blinked, lips tightening. She's resting. Right, I said quietly. Then maybe let her rest. Their eyes followed me as I left the room, every step echoing like a dare. That afternoon, I went to Grandma's office. She didn't look surprised when I told her what I'd seen. She only sighed and said I was hoping they'd at least pretend to wait a week. Do you want me to call the lawyer? I asked. She shook her head. Already did. She opened her drawer and pulled out a folder, another one identical to mine. There are things you don't know about your mother and Scott. Financial documents, deals that were meant to be hidden. My stomach tightened. Why didn't you tell me? Because sometimes, Grandma said, her eyes meeting mine, the only way to teach someone how to defend what's theirs is to let them feel how easily it can be taken. We spent the rest of the day quietly preparing. Grandma called her attorney. I combed through old files labeling transactions that didn't add up. The evidence was there: payments, transfers, ghost accounts. By the time the sun set, the house smelled of coffee and dusted paper. Grandma looked tired but calm. Tomorrow, she said, we'll invite them back for dinner. Let them think they've won. I nodded, understanding. If they wanted a stage, we'd give them one. But this time, the script was ours. The invitation was Grandma's idea. A polite message sent that morning dinner tonight. Let's discuss the transition properly. I watched her type every word with surgical precision. It was bait dressed as peace. By 6, the table was set again, the same oak surface polished to a shine, candles waiting to burn through lies. The house smelled of roasted garlic and quiet tension. Grandma had changed into a dark navy dress, the one she wore only for formal negotiations. Her expression gave nothing away. "Stay calm," she whispered as she placed a silver folder beside my plate. "Let them talk first." At 7, sharp headlights swept across the gravel driveway. The front door opened without a knock. My mother entered first, her heels clicking like a metronome of entitlement. She wore red, bold, deliberate, the color of control. Scott followed close behind, tie-loosened grin, wide. Mom said sweetly, kissing the air near Grandma's cheek. "Sophia." Her voice was smooth but sharp underneath, like glass wrapped in velvet. "I'm glad we're doing this properly." Scott added, "Family decisions deserve transparency." I almost laughed. Dinner began in a polite silence. Plates passed, wine poured, but I could feel their impatience the way Mom's fingers drummed on the table, how Scott's eyes kept flicking toward the silver folder by my hand. Finally, Mom couldn't resist. "So, let's be honest," she said, setting down her fork. "Managing a business of this scale is complex. It's unreasonable to expect a 21-year-old to handle it alone." Grandma sipped her wine, saying nothing. Scott leaned forward, voice confident. "We've already outlined a plan. I'd handle financial optimization, Brenda would oversee PR, and Sophia, well, she could shadow us for a while, learn the ropes." Their words weren't proposals. They were instructions. I set my fork down. "You mean I'd sign the ownership over to you both and you'd manage it?" Scott's grin tightened. "Temporarily." Grandma looked up, eyes unreadable. "And how exactly would that benefit Sophia?" Mom's smile grew wider. "It would benefit everyone. We're family after all." That word again, family. It felt filthy in her mouth. I took a slow breath. "You're right," I said quietly. "We are family." She leaned back, satisfied. "Good. Then let's." Which is why I cut in. "It's time we stop pretending this is about love." Her expression froze. I pushed the folder toward the center of the table. "You wanted transparency. Fine. Let's start with this." Scott reached for it, but Grandma's hand moved faster. She opened the folder, her fingers tracing the first page. The sound of paper sliding filled the room, crisp, final. "These," Grandma said, "are bank statements from the Burlington account. Withdrawals made under Brenda Bennett's signature. Funds that never returned." Mom's face drained of color. "Mother, that's absurd." And Grandma continued evenly. "These are emails from Mr. Miller's consulting firm, proposals for overseas expansion projects that don't exist. Signed by both of you." Scott's jaw clenched. "You had no right to. I had every right." Grandma interrupted, her voice steel. "You tried to mortgage the core hotels under shell companies. You thought I wouldn't notice." The air grew thick. I could hear the fire crackling in the hearth, the only sound brave enough to speak. Mom's eyes darted to me, desperate. "Sophia, this isn't true. She's twisting things. You can't possibly believe." But I didn't need to answer. Grandma slid one last document across the table. "The ownership amendment," she said. "Effective immediately, all control transfers solely to Sophia Bennett. You are hereby removed from every board and trust." Mom stared at the page like it might catch fire. "You can't do this," she whispered. "I already have," Grandma said. Silence. Then it came, the explosion. Mom shot up from her chair, voice cracking. "This is my legacy. My life. You can't just hand it to her." Grandma remained seated. "You handed it away yourself." Scott grabbed Mom's arm, muttering, "Let's just go." But she wasn't done. "No," she shouted, pointing at me. "You think you've won. You're a child playing grown-up. You'll drown in paperwork before the month's out." I met her glare steady. "Maybe. But at least it'll be my mess." Her lip trembled, rage fighting humiliation. "Then pack your bags and leave this house." She spat the same words she'd said days ago, but this time her voice sounded small. And that's when Grandma laughed. It wasn't loud, just a soft, knowing chuckle that sliced the air cleaner than any scream. "You're right, Brenda," she said. "Someone is leaving this house tonight, but it's not Sophia." For a second, everything froze. Even the fire seemed to stop moving. Then Grandma reached into her purse and placed another envelope on the table, a court order. "You've both been served. Fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy. The investigators are waiting outside." Scott's face went pale. "You called the police, I called justice," Grandma said simply. Mom stumbled back, shaking her head. "You wouldn't." "I'm your daughter." "No," Grandma said softly. "You were, until you sold this family's name for a mirror and a title." Two officers entered quietly, their presence polite but final. Scott didn't fight. He just stared at the floor as they led him out. Mom followed her breath, ragged eyes, wild, caught between disbelief and despair. When the door closed, silence filled the house again, but this time it was different, lighter, cleaner, the kind that heals instead of haunts. I sank into my chair, my chest tight, hands trembling. Grandma placed her hand over mine. "I'm sorry you had to see that." "No," I whispered. "I needed to." She nodded, once her eyes glassy but strong. "You handled yourself better than I ever did." I looked at the empty plates, the folded napkins, the remnants of the storm we'd just survived. "Do you think she'll ever forgive us?" I asked quietly. Grandma sighed. "Forgiveness is for people who admit what they've done. Your mother still thinks she was robbed." The fire popped softly, throwing gold across the table. I realized then that this house, the same one where my father walked out years ago, where every fight echoed louder than love, finally felt still. Safe. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, red and blue lights painted the driveway. Scott sat in the back of a cruiser. Mom stood frozen near the porch, mascara streaking down her face. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't even feel relief. Just an ache, deep and quiet, for the family we could have been. Grandma joined me, her reflection beside mine in the glass. "You did good, Sophia," she said. "You didn't raise your voice. You raised your worth." Her words settled in my chest like something permanent. And as the last car disappeared down the hill, the night finally exhaled. We didn't toast, didn't celebrate. We just sat in the quiet glow of the fire, two women who'd survived the same bloodline in different decades finally breaking the pattern. The morning after felt unreal. The same house that had echoed with shouting now hummed with quiet, the kind that follows a storm. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, landing on the folder still sitting at the center of the dining table. The one that had ended it all? Grandma was already up sipping coffee in the kitchen like nothing extraordinary had happened. But her shoulders looked lighter, her face softer, as if decades of weight had finally lifted. The news spread fast. Scott disappeared from the state before the investigation could close. My mother, Brenda, stayed just long enough to watch her name unravel in every business circle she once worshipped. The fraud case stripped her of everything money, position, pride. Dad Mark came by that afternoon. No speeches, no questions. He simply placed a hand on Grandma's shoulder and said, "You did the right thing." When his eyes met mine, they didn't hold pity, only pride. Weeks later, life began to look almost ordinary again. I finished my final architecture presentation, graduated top of my class. Grandma insisted we celebrate quietly at the hotel's rooftop. No press, no guests, just us. She raised her glass and said, "To new foundations." And as the city lights glowed below, I realized that was exactly what this was, a rebuild, not of property or reputation, but of peace. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the leftover of someone else's legacy. I felt like the beginning of my own. I used to believe legacy was about bloodlines and last names, but I've learned it's about boundaries, the courage to end what's toxic even when it wears your DNA. My inheritance wasn't a hotel, it was freedom. If you've ever had to choose peace over family pride, share your story below. You're not alone.